afternoon and welcome to Office Hours, the show where we invite food and beverage entrepreneurs to share the resources and connections we've built up through years of reporting at BevNet and Nosh. I'm Jeff Kleinman, the editor-in-chief of BevNet, and my guests today are Melissa Ficina, the founder, owner, and CEO of City Ops, an outsourced operations firm that focuses on the emerging brands community, as well as City Capital, which applies that operational and strategic expertise for the benefit of its screening process and for its portfolio companies. They just completed a $51 million oversubscribed raise round during an epidemic. Also joining us is her COO, David McCormick. Now, over the course of the pandemic, there's been a lot of core advice, even on this show, on products in a kind of blunt force manner. You get the stuff made, you get it on the shelf, you get paid, you try and repeat. The demand has been there if you can fill it, either in store or online. Now, here's where that's different from the normal progress of the brands that you all build. There's seemingly little ability for brands to create new sales opportunities and also to market their products for increased velocity. Yes, marketing online is now a must-have capability, but when we've all gone to ground, things have seemed to revert to an output intake model that doesn't allow for much glitz or glitter. Operations, good connections, they allow you to take advantage of openings when you can, but otherwise we're all trying to live to fight another day. Now that just keep swimming approach can work at least temporarily if your financial and operational setup allows you to. And that's why we're focusing on the intersection of operations and finance today with our guests, as they're able to give us a look inside the manufacturing cost centers. But they aren't here to just tell us to live to fight another day. Melissa and David are here to talk about ways that operations can be turned into a specific advantage for certain brands, and how companies that are innovative and growth hungry can find a path towards leaning back in towards that innovation and growth, and maybe even do so with some investment capital behind them. After all, they just completed a $50 million raise of their own. As always, we ask you to submit your questions to talk with these experts via email to officehours@bevnet.com or by texting to 781-423-3520. Before we begin, it's important for me to say, as I will at least a couple more times today, that this particular Office Hours is actually open to all viewers through BevNet and Nosh's virtually live event, which is kicking off next week. If you haven't subscribed to BevNet or Nosh, we have Office Hours behind our paywall just about every week. And Virtually Live is a special event designed to provide entrepreneurs and their ecosystem with case studies, best practices, growth strategies, and the opportunity to meet and network with investors, retailers, distributors, and their peers. Right now, there are 600 attendees signed up, and we're having more than 40 different content sessions. So if you haven't signed up, I'd say that you really need to. So let's get back to operations and finance and our guests. And I want to ask Melissa the amazing story of how City got started.
Well, first, thanks for having us. Awesome intro. City got started in concept a long time ago, officially about 6 years ago. But I got my first entrance into the food space at 11, which is about 25 years ago. For those of you who don't know, my family has a fairly large beverage manufacturing company in the country and serves as, I think, the largest privately held co-manufactured juice operation in North America. And so at 11, I was hand palletizing super heavy juice cartons and kind of learning that operations and all the key infrastructure in manufacturing is what supported products getting into the hands of consumers. So I left the family business at about 30 years old, had stayed there through most of my education, and left for a few reasons. One was, a very large business really had limited taste for innovation, and I thought that was the direction the emerging community was going. I cared a lot about what I fed myself, my family, and didn't align with some of the former food and beverage practices of the decades before, and saw a fundamental need in passionate entrepreneurs who had awesome products and innovative thought processes and really wanted to make a mark on the food business, but had a very limited concept in what it meant to operate a business, start co-manufacturing ventures, understand how to pick the right partnerships, and then ultimately how to build back an infrastructure that supports that. So Citi was born by me singularly, and fast forward to today, we're a pretty robust team, have dozens of clients whose businesses we run the back end of right now. And obviously, thanks for pointing out, in the middle of a pandemic, proudly closed a $50 million fund in 19 days.
That's amazing. Now, David, how did you join the group?
I joined Citi out of up-and-coming brand based in Boulder, Colorado, focused, on salty snacks, and got to work with some of the folks at Citi through relationships and needing to lean in on operational support. Got to learn a little bit more about how Citi approaches operations and benefits brands, and I felt like my experience both in retail at Whole Foods Market and then on the brand side would be a really great value add to what Citi has to offer.
I'm interested how the Whole Foods experience works into operations. I mean, did you see things that were poorly made, or did you see solutions when you were in the buying role?
Yeah, so when you're on the other side, as I like to call it, you have a lot of expectations around what brands have to offer, things you would like to have in terms of price point, category needs, etc. Coming to the brand side, you realize how hard that really is to achieve some of those goals. One small tweak to packaging or, to achieve that price point to be the next best thing isn't as easy to always come by. So I think the benefit that I have on the team is understanding what some of those, category review, category assortment decisions are, and then helping brands navigate where they fit that need, and then reverse engineer back through the supply chain how to get there.
That's really interesting. So, Melissa, I just want to make sure that we can jump back and make sure we've got a clear definition. How does Citi define operations?
So many people define operations as production and manufacturing. And, yes, I think it's a core, obviously, requirement to understand and have the right setup to have the proper production, whether it's, co-man, self-manufactured. But I think operations is more than that. It's back-end infrastructure. It's how to get all the makings of a product to the production floor if you're not operating in a turnkey style with a co-man, how to bring packaging infrastructure and pack form to life in a product. It's setting up, inventory builds, opportunities for demand planning, how product gets from the manufacturing center, again, regardless if it's co-man or self-manufactured, and into distribution. What warehousing partners do you choose? How do you pick the right 3PL relationships? I think that's something here, honestly, at Citi that we've mastered, which is integrating a huge portfolio. I think between both companies now, we're looking at 65 to 70 portfolio companies. And so we've managed to blend a lot of infrastructure to support these businesses as they advance to different levels of scale. Back to your original question, actually, I was thinking as I said that it's about supplier relationships and continuity and, making sure that you're managing risk. So many people forget that insurance and legal and accounting are all really part of fundamental operational structures.
So let's talk about those areas of operations that brands don't seem to know about while they're launching and while they're trying to scale. What are some of the areas where they just show up vexed, or they show up not working as companies as well as they could be?
David, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think, two main things: how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. I think those are the first two big aha moments for brands when they start on the innovation cycle or bringing brands to or products to market. So as folks are trying to manage innovation during this time, I think they have to really be considering what it is, how much it's going to actually take to get it made and at scale, and how long and how you're going to get there. There's a lot of folks right now that are really focused on, or we're planning to launch in March, April for a specific channel that are completely having to revisit their channel strategy, their form factor, maybe even their formulation to try to figure out a way to pivot and meet the needs of the market right now. And so a lot of brands really need to be asking themselves, is what they're creating truly innovative and warrants kind of the innovation time cycle to bring products to market? And then how much is that going to really cost them? I'm really proud of our team. Our team's developed a remote trial process that I think has enabled brands to continue to work on iterations of different formulations and make these pivots while the restrictions at manufacturing and manufacturing sites have been limited. So I think that those are the two big things. What is it, how long is it going to take, and how much is it going to cost?
So this remote trial process, is that also going to buyers as well, or is it more just iteration while you're developing product?
It's more iteration on the back end with manufacturers, but it's really about being buttoned up and having really good pre-flight plans, how you plan to execute a trial, how you plan to measure that trial, and then what are the ways and means in which we're going to be communicating throughout that day. That ironically, I think my team's going to have to make a strong argument to get back on airplanes, because I think it's a little bit more efficacious than even our former trial process. But what's important, I think, is understanding kind of the demands that are on manufacturing right now, and then making sure that you're, supporting them with trials, but not becoming a nuisance either.
So if you're a brand, we hear a lot about companies becoming nuisances for their operations, for their manufacturers, for their co-mans. What happens in that relationship between brand and operator that either results in you guys being called in to manage that, or that just is the big watch out if you're trying to do it on your own?
Yeah, I'm going to take a first stab at that. I think one of our successes as a firm has come out of the fundamental knowledge of what it means to be a co-manufacturing partner. And so I happen to just be gifted that via osmosis in my family. But we also took very careful attention to build a team here that was manufacturing focused and another team that was day-to-day operations focused. And the manufacturing focused team all came out of manufacturing. And so I think the first part is there's got to be some sort of an equal footing and an equal relationship. That does not mean that, the co-man gets to take advantage of everything on behalf of the brand. And it certainly doesn't mean that the brand gets to come in with a tremendous ego and ask for the manufacturing partner, to run it at less than ideal margin opportunity for them. And so I think it's finding out fundamentally what your manufacturing partner cares about. And they don't all care about the same thing. Many of them care about the same thing, but they've all had experiences. Some have had bad ones with emerging brands. Some have had phenomenal ones. Some have had equity in ones that have gotten to the point of exit and they've made out good with it. And some have been burned by taking equity in their branded partners. We, by the way, shy away from the equity on the co-man side, and it's not a favorite strategic alliance of ours. But I'll say it's finding out what your manufacturing partner cares about, understanding what their struggles are, their points of success and points of weakness, being able to help usher those points of weaknesses through to successes. And then understanding where their liabilities fall, frankly, and building some infrastructure and support on the brand side to help support those liabilities so that not everything falls in the hands of the co-manufacturing partner. So for me, that's how we drive every manufacturing relationship from the beginning when we have the opportunity to, meaning when the brand allows us to actually drive that. Not always the case. And then, I'm sure David's actually probably got some more minute details on what our team actually deals with in challenging times. I'll tell you from a crisis perspective, I often get called in when a brand sets up a bad relationship, fundamentally is years down the road and desperately needs to peel away from them, start a new manufacturing relationship, do it with limited time or get out of exclusivity opportunities. And we are really re-engineering or repairing that current relationship or having an opportunity to switch them. But David, I'm sure our brand, our brands and folks deal with some pretty specific stuff as it relates to co-manufacturing partners.
I think brands that want to be successful need to be solving a manufacturing need just as much as a consumer customer need. So if you think about a facility that just put in a new line and that's trying to return on that investment or fill out capacity, how are you filling that need? Or how are you helping them round out whatever kind of operational desires they have? I think that's, if you understand that about your brand and what role you play in your manufacturing partners on that front, you can then negotiate with them and find ways to move your programs forward. I think the other part of it is, sadly, even for many of us within the industry, our connection with food and where it comes from is kind of distorted. And the time and energy and how much actually goes into the supply chain to get your products made and continue to keep them making. And so the more that folks can set out to become an expert and understand clearly all that goes into making their product upstream, the better off they're going to be in executing and getting their products to market and being successful, whether that's D2C or at the shelf.
So I want to stay on this for a sec because I think you bring up a really relevant point, particularly to the suite of people who are likely to be listening or watching this show, which is the idea of natural products, organic products. The dream isn't just the certification, it's also the removal of those extra processing steps. And certainly, given your organization's positioning as a backer of those kinds of products, particularly some with really complex developmental qualities like plant-based meats, I think you're in a unique position to really talk about best practices in pulling steps out and where the where the big hurdles are in developing natural and scalable products at the same time. So if we can take a quick detour into that realm, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I mean, I guess the first question is, how adaptable has the manufacturing environment been to allow for minimal processing and get it to scale?
I'll take a first crack, and I think Melissa will probably want to add on to this, but I think in current circumstances, manufacturers are focused on what do they run, what do they have clear know-how on that doesn't have a lot of complexity that they can continue to make and keep the lights on. I think that that's probably what's most important to them. Deviating from that, running some new ingredient that they're less familiar with, or having to change their process and move from one kettle to a next and then back to another to just avoid an ingredient or a binder, is not something folks are trying to add onto their plate as they're dealing with fever checks and reduced staff, et cetera. So being mindful of that, I think, is really helpful. Internally, and with the folks that we work with, we talk a lot about kind of this complexity gap that's nonlinear and it kind of exponentially grows with every one of those attributes you want to put on the package. So, we're big believers, we see ourselves as change agents in the food industry, and we want to continue to better the supply chain out there. But with every one of those boxes that you want to tick, organic, kosher, keto, whatever that might be, immunity these days, you're going to have to give yourself either some more time, have more resource, or focus on quality. It's kind of like that basic principle of project management. You can choose two, but you can't have all three. And I think those are the areas that we try to emphasize with our brands and help them navigate when they're trying to move through those. Like, I have a great concept and idea, I'm trying to bring it to market, I'm trying to solve this specific problem. Maybe that's plastic, one-way plastic, in the oceans, et cetera. How do we help folks navigate that and create a scalable business that they can actually take to scale?
So I think that's fascinating. I think this idea, having to pull back, has to be really frustrating for a lot of clients. How much are you hearing that? Like, we want to go, we want to improve, we want to continue that sort of lights out in the environment right now. And yet we can't push people to do it. I mean, I guess it goes back to that empathy that y'all were talking about, is we gotta understand that we can't necessarily push the curve right now.
Right. Push the curve on development and or even existing production runs, making sure just the production you had planned gets executed the way you hoped it would. And so I think for us, if you thought it was hard to, manage your job during a pandemic, imagine how hard it was for folks that were managing 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. So these folks who are on the front lines working in fields or plant floors or grocery stores are putting it all out there. And so understanding that, and then, being able to temper whatever, anticipations or pressures you have to make pivots or meet the demands of the market right now, you got to be cognizant of that and make sure you're aware of that and have empathy and compassion for the folks that are actually making your product. And then, beyond that, I think you can only control so much at one point. So if you can diversify and think about multiple points of manufacturing or parallel pathing your development, that's another really great way to try to stay ahead of the curve.
I have one more question on this topic. Do you think we've taken a permanent step back on this? because of this timeout? Were things advancing for less processed items pre, what my wife during what my wife likes to call before times? And do you think we're going to be able to pick it back up?
Yeah, I don't think people, I think the timetable might change for, how quickly we bring things to market, how quick retailers actually pick them up and get them placed. And so we might see a slowdown there, but I think there's been enough of a shift in what folks have kind of created as a new standard and transparency and where their food comes from and what goes in there, that I don't think that we resort back to an easier to produce product at this point. I think what we have to do, as folks have gone to the grocery store and wanted to pick up their favorite alternative milk, for instance, and it may have been out of stock, have had to explore other options. And if anything, I think folks are more open to change now than ever before.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'll add on to that too, that there was some fundamental structural changes that we were instituting on the plant floors before the pandemic. And what I mean by that is, there are innovative products. Plant-based is obviously a category that there's a lot of focus in now. It's also a category where there's no real dedicated plant-based co-manufacturing. There's some, not enough to support the infrastructure that's coming to market now. And so, we've tackled it not by process change, although in part we do drive toward the more simplified process. We've also helped manage it on the CapEx side and tried to leverage making it easier for manufacturers to join being part of that fundamental food system change by having brand purchased CapEx equipment, which goes into a whole slew of other things that is a brand benefit that I don't have to go into now. But that helps the manufacturer know and understand that the risk is lower. They can enter into a space that they may have wanted to take part in and do it less capital intensive, or with what they think is a better outcome because there's better machinery available. Obviously, there's a risk, and you have to have dollars from a brand perspective to be able to do something like that. But it has certainly shortened the time frame to some degree, and I think helps in the ease of a more simplified environment.
So let's talk about risk for a minute, and I think that's really interesting. I wonder if so over the years that I've been covering the business, I often hear about brands kind of purchasing the machine and parking it in the factory. One thing I've never asked anyone though is, how is it sort of a slam dunk arrangement most of the time? Like, you offer to buy it, they're happy to run it, or what are the major factors that get in the way of that occurring?
Yeah, not every co-man wants that. They don't want the liability of a piece of machinery on the floor. You get into fundamental challenges of, can we use the line time, not on your brand, but on a competitive brand, or on our own brand or a private label brand? You've got to worry about insurance risks and exposures. You've got to worry about maintenance and spare parts. And so I think and generally speaking, by the way, one piece of equipment doesn't do it. And so you can build a line that includes a lot more space, a lot more labor, a lot more overhead. Yes, sometimes you can bring in one piece of equipment. Packaging would be a good example of that. But I would say, yes, a lot of times small manufacturers are willing to take in that because they don't want to spend the dollars and frankly don't have the dollars to spend. Really qualified, middle market to high volume premium co-manufacturers don't want that. unless it's a deal with Pepsi, for example, and you're making a juice product for them, and they want to buy the whole line because they want to take out that whole infrastructure. So I think, again, back to what we were saying just a few minutes ago, is understand who you're targeting, and that every conversation and relationship will be different. Also, because you buy one piece of equipment for one co-man doesn't mean that if that manufacturing relationship goes bad, you get it back and take it to another one and it's exactly
Right.
the same. And so there are several ways to navigate that.
So when you talk about knowing your targets as well, it may be one thing to think, well, I can buy this for my particular audience if I know it's going to be a limited set, if I'm not going to have to scale later and continue to buy these things and continue to place them, or change my manufacturing process to fit. So should you be thinking about what you plan for the brand down the line if you're going for a bespoke piece of equipment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say it all depends on how expensive the equipment is and how challenging the product is to actually make. Let's talk about plant-based products and high moisture extrusion for a second. I mean, like an extruder for that is extremely expensive. And so buying it and throwing it away the following year is just not something that your investors are going to be thrilled about, besides all the other ancillary items you have to buy to make it work. And so something like that, you're making, I think, a bid now to build infrastructure later. If it's a product that truly has scalable manufacturing, but you're lacking current line time, I think that's a different undertaking. That maybe there are 20 places in the country you could go to get it made, but right now no one has that, line time or space. And so I think we have to think about, I'm sure when we've all entered the natural product space, it was so much smaller than it is today. How many new brands come out every single quarter or every single year? Well, all those brands have to be made somewhere. And so what has happened is manufacturing in the food and beverage industry consolidated pretty dramatically in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then all of a sudden, these small batch co-mans started popping up everywhere in order to service the need. And so now I think we're going to fundamentally go through another time of consolidation, frankly. And I think the manufacturing partners who have been able to create the infrastructure that is most desired are going to be the ones that are bought up and folded into a system. Maple Leaf Foods is the perfect example of that. Who founded Greenleaf, and Greenleaf went up and bought all these facilities and plant-based products and ended up buying manufacturing infrastructure to support it. So, I think, yes, it has to be a consideration because you don't want to waste dollars, but we've got, clients all day long who spend $50,000 on a piece of equipment because it helps them get through launch or their first $2 or $3 million of sales. And frankly, we don't really think about that 50 grand in year 2 or year 3 because it achieved its purpose. And so I would say very much fundamentally depends on the manufacturing footprint that's ahead of you.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, just real quick, I think one of the pitfalls is thinking too far out and not enough in the medium or short term around where the brand wants to be. So oftentimes I think brands can get hung up thinking about where they need to be, 3, 5, 10 years from now, which is important. You want to know where you want to go, but you don't want to let the decisions you need to make within the next 6 to 12 months be gated by that direction. So there's still plenty of time to get to that point where you want to become a liquidity event, for instance. But brands are really focused at launch, especially on the emerging side, on more about where they want to be versus where they are today. And focused on economies of scale and all of these things that I think can be troubling for the balance sheet and cash flow when you're first launching and starting a brand. But getting too hung up on where they are today and where they want to be is a pitfall. And so, I think on the equipment front, making those small adjustments to put $50K on the floor to get you to launch into a new account or expand capacity for the next 12 months is smart. Worrying if that can take you to 10 years is a point of diminishing returns on that.
Well, and let me just add too, we're talking about, clients and or companies we've invested in that have gone anywhere from 50 grand to 10 million. And so
exactly,
there's a huge range of what that means. But to David's point, how many of us know companies who had a vision on day one or day 365, and 3 years out, it's totally different. The product has changed, the customers changed, the buying habits have changed, the retail partnerships have changed. And so for crying out loud, some people can't even get through the first year without changing. And so I think you're exactly right, David, that too far in advance, sometimes we plan for and then never even get there.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask the two of you, is there a manufacturing process, a piece of equipment, a technological application that you're particularly interested in working with right now that you can't wait to get your hands on, or that you find a lot of people are starting to move to right now?
I'm particularly focused not on a specific piece of equipment, but in helping to lay the manufacturing footprint for plant-based products in general. We launch and commercialize hundreds of SKUs a year across dozens of product categories. Plant-based is something people have come to us to help solve for. It happens to be a fundamental passion and a challenge because we're taking core ingredients and turning them into something else, right?
Yeah.
That has a flavor, texture, profile that is similar to traditional dairy or meat products. And most of the large volume plant-based products have had to be forced into self-manufacturing instead of co-manufacturing right now. Not all. There's some very successful folks who entirely use co-man. But I think that's because they're being forced to manufacture while not being a manufacturer, which is a fundamental problem. But it's because they can't go somewhere to get it done right or get it done well. So I think for every piece of CapEx, by the way, that we put down places, we're also doing that on purpose and with a map, knowing of what's laid down almost for the future. And I will say several of our plant-based brands who are laying that infrastructure do so with a lot of support, knowing that they're going to help create that pathway for others coming down the line behind them. So for me, it's not a technology. It's just literally laying a fundamental blueprint for the next stage of kind of plant-based infrastructure.
So you think the industry is far enough along that we're starting to see inklings of best practices on those products that, if a jackfruit company, for example, were to go out of business, the next generation would be able to access that manufacturing footprint?
Well, first I'll say no, I don't think the industry is far enough along at all. I think we're in like 1.2 out of 10 of opportunity. But yes, I think there are certain processes that are very simplified. Kettle cooking, oven baking, stuff that we've used or leveraged in a variety of other product types that you can bring into some of the plant-based manufacturing. And so I think they're usable many times over, and it's actually the ingredient married with the process profile that makes it capable to perform the way that it does. Is there, back to high moisture extrusion, are there footprints being laid for $7 and $10 million lines for high moisture extrusion? Yes, most of them are owned, frankly, by the brands who are utilizing them. And so we're not talking about that, although that is a next generation for me. Why we're not talking about that is because that takes a tremendous amount of capital. And so that's on my forefront over the next 5 years of things I would like to personally achieve, is tackling all sizes and shapes of manufacturing profiles for that type of product. I just don't think enough people have spent enough time on it yet. And we've clearly seen that consumers are shifting to supporting that as a category, maybe not in entirety and maybe not giving up meat and dairy 100%, but at least having a shared fridge.
I think you're going to see a confluence of different technologies and processes come together also. So as plant-based infrastructure is being built out, parallel to that, you have Cell Ag and everybody in that space trying to solve that need. And so when those two pieces of manufacturing come together, I think we're going to continue to see an evolution and change in terms of what we need on the plant floor. You might go from high moisture extruders to 3D printers.
Yeah, I mean, do you live in fear of cellular ag, Melissa?
I don't. We've got 3 cell ag companies in our portfolio from an investment perspective. And also, I think it is still weird, right? If we just fundamentally break it down, I think I was offered a beef chip about 6 years ago or so from a company called Modern Meadow. And they had only had like 25 chips that they were passing around. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to kill me? I'm going to eat this thing that you tell me is meat that's created in a lab. Is it going to kill me? That was literally my first thought. It didn't, and I'm obviously here to tell the story. But it's weird when you think about it. Does it solve a problem? Yes. Are there really smart minds attacking it? 100%. And so, there's all the way at the spectrum of cell ag by itself, which is very sciencey and will have some time to solve for mass scale. I'm not sure if it'll be as long as everyone thinks it will be, but it's still some time. And then there's products that are looking to blend it and say, let's take a little bit of, cell ag in fat, let's call it, and let's marry it with a plant-based protein product. And let's put them together, and now you have a juicy burger because we've been
preferably in a high moisture extrusion environment.
No, without high moisture extrusion. But so I think David's right. I think all of those things are going to start to fundamentally change manufacturing. And also, we will still have simplified core products that everybody eats that are snacks like pretzels or potato chips. They're probably not going to go through a whole lot of innovation on the manufacturing floor, but we still need to solve for getting them made when new products with new ingredient profiles come to life.
So where are y'all putting your investment bets right now? Let's talk about the investment practice a little bit.
Yeah, we are slightly, very non-traditional in the sense that we partnered with the family office of the former CEO of Credit Suisse USA and his son, who was already making some food investments. They partnered with us in very stealth mode over the last year. And, we got them access to deals that folks wanted to bring us specifically into, but also they got access to some very high performing deals that we wouldn't have otherwise known about or had access to. So I think it's the blending of truly the financial genius and the operating and strategy approach that have gotten us, seats at some of the tables. And so I think they're in 2 buckets right now, frankly. By the way, why I said we're non-traditional is we've got 38 investments already, and we literally just launched. How is that? Well, because we were leveraging a family office before. So it's 2 buckets. The first is, pre-revenue / very early stage innovative products, particularly in plant-based, but not always. That's where the city ops team can get very attached, dedicated for, quite some time to get products ramped, commercialized, scaled out the door, cost structures right, negotiations right, back-end infrastructure built for scale. The second bucket is super high performing D2C brands, companies that are going 5 to 25 to 100 million in 24 to 36 months. And we have a handful of those also. Will the city ops team be needed for that? No. But do we get to experience the opportunity to invest along brands that are doing pretty significant volume in changing some infrastructure in the food and beverage space. Yes, and that's exciting also. So I would say that's the focus right now, is those two buckets, and they're very different.
So what are the areas where brands are best able to pull costs out of their manufacturing? And is that something you're targeting with your investment practice? Is it, oh, well, if we could get this chip made in, I'm going to show how little I know, in a high moisture extrusion process environment, we'd be able to operate at a much higher margin. Are you looking for that company that's looking for that margin improvement through manufacturing cost improvement, or is it just innovation?
I'll let David add to this, but I would say we are certain that the expertise on the city ops side can reduce costs across our brands. To what degree, I don't know. Everyone has a whole different sliding scale on how you attack that. Is it ingredient? Is it packaging? Is it manufacturing? Is it tolling? Is it where you put your products in a warehouse? Is it consolidation? Is it SKU rationalization? I mean, there are tons of ways to attack costs. And so we're sure we can drive them lower. We're also sure that the sooner we get involved, the better we will have visibility into that. Now, what I will say is we may not make the decision that cost is something that matters right away. We may think that the product is so important to have in market that we're okay having a little bit lower margin, not like 0, not 10, but lower than what the norm would be acceptable, because we're sure that the second scale of it is going to be able to bring material change to that. So that's my answer to it, David. I'm sure you've got more insight from a cost perspective.
Yeah, I think we can, everything Melissa said is, how we approach reducing costs, but I think we're really conscious of working capital in general. So, if you're going to go save a penny on corrugate because you're going to go buy 2 million impressions, that's not necessarily something we're going to advise against, or stand behind. I think we're more focused on strong inventory turns, being really working capital efficient, and bringing down costs in that same respect. And then not being so short-sighted to, race to the bottom and cut all of our partners out that have helped us get there and go chase the newest, lowest price that's out there. I think that that's another important principle to kind of try to maintain. And so I don't necessarily think costs are a bad thing. I think spending is not a problem. Blind hope and no budgets ruin businesses though. So you better know what you're spending and what the costs are of the business, and you have a really strong budget and you have the scenarios laid out for worst case, best case, and know how you're going to manage those when certain circumstances arise, that box isn't available anymore, or manufacturing might slow down and you do have to get long on stock, and dip into the balance sheet and buy a little bit more inventory. So I think those are that's our holistic approach to running a really strong operation, is reducing costs, creating value, but also just being really mindful of what's in the bank.
So one of the things we talked about when we were prepping for this was this idea of risk. And I'm bringing it up because, David, you were talking about, well, are these relationships going to last? Is it, or are you going to race to the bottom and try and cut costs out? So I'm just wondering from both of you, what the keys are that you see to de-risking with regards to both the finance side and the operations side. I mean, what does a trustworthy brand look like?
David, you want to tackle that one first?
What does a trustworthy? I think all brands have a desire to be trustworthy, and so that's what everyone sets out to do. I think folks that have a clear understanding of the type of business that they want to run and the type of relationships and kind of I'll go as far to say is kind of like a moral compass around how they want to operate, indicate good brands that, folks should invest in and get behind. And so, I think that's what first comes to mind for me on that front. I think, and there's not some incredibly complex solution to that. If you need to have a really good price and you need to guarantee supply, work on a decent, win-win supply contract and try to, like we said earlier in the chat, try to find out what that supplier's needs are and try to fill that need for them. I think that that's really key, and having the right agreements and protections in place only further ensure brands can stay the course that they want. It's when maybe you deviate, cut costs, don't hire a lawyer, paper your own agreement, then things get off the rails, and then you have no decisions, like nothing to fall back to collectively to help through that scenario. And then that's when things get problematic for brands, I think.
Melissa?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that fundamentally people who come into the natural product space are just good-hearted people. We see it in, and by we, I mean, all of us collectively in the space see it because we're a culture here who strives to help even the competitor, which always very much surprised me in the beginning when I really set foot from very large scale, conglomerate style manufacturing to these small brands. And I was like, whoa, that's your competition. What are you giving them your secret for, or your supplier? And it's like, it's such a nice, humbling, experience to be part of this community. But I think that integrity, right? Something, for me, fundamentally, probably the most important thing. Integrity has to drive your decisions in business building. That's with your employees, that's with your service partners, that's with your manufacturing partners, your suppliers, your retail partners, because it's in part about the product and it's in part about the people. And that's been shown so many times that because a buyer loves a founder, products get brought into the shelf. And then obviously they have to perform. You've got to have the right turns and velocities and trade spend, and consumers like it. But first, it fundamentally starts with the story and the people. And so, for me, I think making decisions, and it's hard sometimes, that are very forward in integrity across the board really help to drive, these brands from point A to point B, and do it with a guiding light.
I've got to ask, knowing the time that we're living in, how much access do you think minorities have to that story right now, to that buying decision? How can we improve that particular set of circumstances for folks who may not have quick access? I'm sorry if this catches you a little flat-footed.
No, it's okay. Quick access to what?
To capital, manufacturing, buyers who they may not know as well as someone who's been working in natural products for a long time.
Sure. That's a good question. So first, I'll tell you, all of us at some point entered into the space at ground zero. And so regardless of where we came from, what our backgrounds were, I get told frequently that my, parents are in the food industry. And so it's, how easy it was for me, when actually I've never had any contact ever made from any relationship in that space, because it's fundamentally a different world. And so I think we all start the same way, which is find, like-minded people driven to like-minded passions. As I just shared, that I think the industry, is super humble and friendly. You can find people who've made similar products, and they are often friendly with, knowledge, learnings, challenges. And so I think it's kind of chipping away at it, frankly, piece by piece. I can say there have been some amazing ladies in this space who have started something called the Women on Boards Project, They were nice enough to invite me as a co-founder to that mission. And so, we're doing our part to open up influential leadership seats to not just, women as a category, but, women of all different, ethnicities and races, in order to be able to come in and help serve at various levels of the natural product space. And so that's only one small sliver, I think, of effort. But there are things fundamentally being done. And I think I'm back to the core of relationships and connecting with people, and generally putting something out there. When your intention is out there and you tell people what the intention is, you often get people who are helping you achieve that.
And fundamentally, I think it starts at a more basic level of, access. Let's start just even at food access, for folks who might be an underserved minority. Let's start there and focus on ways where we can make eating better and eating higher quality food more accessible. And then progress and get more folks involved and enrolled in bettering the food system and access to good quality food.
That was such
well. I know that you two are coming from a place where there's a social consciousness behind the kinds of foods that you're trying to produce as well. And so I certainly appreciate that, and I appreciate your willingness to join us and talk through all of these things. The company is City, and it's Melissa Ficina, and it's David McCormick, and it's a real resource that we're happy to start getting to know. So thank you very much for joining us. And I wanted also now to say thank you to my excellent team here, Jackie Brugliera, Jessica Fagan, Joshua Pratt, my pack of J's. They've been putting the pedal to the metal for weeks here, and not just for this show, and not just to bring on these excellent guests, but for all of our live stream content. Before we end for the week, I want to say that Jackie and Jess and Josh are going to be helping run our virtual conference next week. And we couldn't be more excited or terrified at the process of inviting so many guests to peek into our living rooms. I'm going to put on my sales hat once again and say that if you haven't checked out the virtually live agenda, I gotta urge you to do so. You'll see that we're having sessions on topics that range from finance to company culture to sales and marketing to incredible data resources from many different agencies. And that we're also spending time, as we did today, addressing issues of racial inequality and the ways that the food and beverage business can begin equalizing opportunity for all. Beyond that, we're welcoming citizen chef Tom Colicchio for an exclusive interview on the food and beverage industry and its role in solving, as David was talking about, food insecurity issues. Look, we're at a time, and I'm so happy to have had City on for this, because we're at a time when leaders need to be helpers, and the helpers are the leaders. And to get through this time, we've all got to learn together how to do both, how to help and how to lead. So I hope you'll subscribe, I hope you'll register, and I hope you'll join us. And we'll see you next week at Virtually Live. Melissa and David, thank you so much for joining us on Office Hours. Can't wait to have you back.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much. Thanks for all the work.
Thank you.